TyTy Washington has all the makings to be one of the best guards in the 2022 draft. So what does he need to get better at, and how high can he go come draft night? This is Floor and Ceiling. Let's break him down. In a draft class that maybe is not as stacked as last year, but definitely one that features a lot of depth, TyTy Washington might be the best guard in the 2022 draft. At 6'3" with a 6'9" wingspan, Washington definitely plays bigger than he is, and at the same time can bring a lot to the table in every way imaginable on offense. The only question is, how good is he really at what he does? With TyTy Washington, let's start with his floater. Washington can get into this shot out of one or both feet. He has been making these shots going back to high school, so we've been able to track the improvement. Washington prefers to go right, but he can go either way to get into his shot. He's got good length for a guard, which makes Washington hard to block as he runs into his floater. Washington has smooth, soft touch, but something that goes by underrated in my opinion is his toughness. Washington is stronger than he seems, able to finish through some contact. At times, Washington is even able to dislodge defenders when it gets physical down low. Overall, this in-between game is a surefire strength for Washington at this stage of his development. He gets into it in rhythm, and even though you can kinda see it coming, it's tough to stop because of his size, touch, and versatility. Washington ranks above the 90th percentile for floaters, and these shots make up about 20% of his field goal attempts. Clearly, Washington is comfortable taking these floaters, but we should also be asking ourselves, why does he take so many? Washington does not really apply pressure to the rim, and he is not a top athlete. He would much rather avoid contact, which is why Washington shoots less than 2 free throws a night. He also has just 2 dunks all season. You're hoping for improvement here, but to be clear, this is not an all-around weakness. Washington's in-between game offsets his athletic limitations, but in turn, it's important to note that this can affect the rest of his game. From purely a measurement standpoint, there's a lot to like about Washington. He has a +6 wingspan despite being 6'3", which allows him to play both guard positions. However, Washington does not stand out athletically. He is skilled enough so that his lack of elite athleticism does not affect how productive he is, but still, Washington is more of a guy who plays at his own pace, rather than someone who is always stopping and going, or exploding at you. He does not have that burst, but Washington is always pretty even-keeled, like we will get into. Still, Washington cannot really change directions quickly, and his handle could still get more creative. You hope that with NBA spacing, this will not be a big issue, but this possession right here where he takes on LSU big Efton Reed and cannot really do anything worries me. Despite those athletic limitations though, I still really like Washington's potential as a 3-level scorer. When he does get to the rim, Washington finishes 69% of his shots. The problem is that his volume from that part of the floor is really low. I would like to see Washington use this hezzy more often because he can legit freeze bigs, and then he's good enough of a ball handler to get to the rim. If Washington can get stronger and learn to leverage his length to either get more creative with his finishing or create contact, that would go a long way. However, something that is already, I would think, almost NBA ready is Washington's mid-range pull-up. Washington is really fluid coming out of screens and pulling up. Again, he prefers to go right, but he is a pretty effortless shot maker. Washington is good getting to his pull-up off a ball screen, but it's usually just one dribble pull-up type of stuff. He is still someone who is reliant on getting screens to then get buckets. This is not necessarily a bad thing, and certainly we've seen that Washington can do this. He makes more than 48% of his 2-point jumpers, and less than a fifth of those J's are assisted, which shows that Washington is creating his own shot very, very often. Washington is not someone who pounds the ball. He will want to go right most of the time, but he can get into his shot in a few ways despite his still improvable handle. Washington can use or reject screens and attack closeouts. We've also seen a couple step backs or some more crafty shots off the dribble. It would be great for him if he could continue expanding his game into this. I understand the hesitations over a guard that largely works in the mid-range, but we've seen some success if you're good enough. DeJounte Murray is the latest example of this. For a college freshman, Washington is pretty much a sniper. But while we watch him produce in the mid-range, it is worth remembering that he is older for a freshman. Washington is already 20, and he'll turn 21 shortly after the start of his rookie NBA season. Going out to the three-point line, we've seen some flashes, but Washington still needs to improve. First, I'm not worried about his shot, but he is shooting just 35% from 3. More importantly, Washington just looks more comfortable spotting up than pulling up off the dribble. And even there, it's not like Washington is faultless. He neither makes nor takes a high volume of threes, so I would not be overly surprised if it takes him a little bit to get acclimated to the NBA three-point line. However, Washington is better as a secondary shooter, which makes me think that he can be a really good fit for a secondary guard role in the NBA. Washington can be someone who creates his own offense in some ways, but he can also play seamlessly off the ball. 1 in 5 of Washington's threes right now are assisted, so I definitely see him as a spot-up shooter from deep at first. Also, Washington's shot diet is tough to digest right now. More than half his shots are two-point jumpers, so there will be an adjustment curve, I would think. However, Washington's timely cuts also help in imagining his role as an off-ball guard. If he can leverage his shot making into attention and then take advantage of that by cutting and slashing, Washington should be getting more easy buckets like these. And hopefully, this means that once he's able to be productive in other ways, he will not be as reliant on pulling up from 2. Finally though, let's get into TyTy Washington's passing, starting with his work in ball screen situations. Washington can run a basic pick and pop. He plays with good pace, wants to attract another defender before dishing the ball off, and generally is pretty smooth. I expect this skill to be amplified in the NBA even more. He's largely had to play this two-man game with Oscar Tshiebwe, who is not really a shooter, or maybe with someone like Keon Brooks who would rather step in and shoot. Washington doesn't really have a big on his team that can pop out to the perimeter consistently, and given that, I think that the geometry of an NBA court with its much better spacing will help Washington, not necessarily in terms of making reads, but just having better options. Where Washington is really steady though is in the more traditional pick and roll. In terms of numbers, Washington ranks around the 90th percentile whenever he is hitting the roller. He is poised and patient, able to pass with one or both hands. Washington never does anything super flashy, but he is consistent with his on-target deliveries. Washington prefers to go right, much like with his scoring, but this does not limit his playmaking right now, especially because he can go either way. Another thing to note is that Washington has shown growth as a playmaker over the course of his freshman year. Kentucky started out with the ball in Severe Wheeler's hands a lot more, but that sort of turned around early in the new year, and since then we've seen Washington at his best. This season he is averaging 2.5 assists per every turnover, so essentially Washington creates lots of good looks while never being sloppy. Like I said, he's not the flashiest passer, but Washington is not one-dimensional either. He has some good versatility with his playmaking. For starters, Washington can attack closeouts. This bodes well for him since I think he can be a strong spot-up shooter. Then Washington can also hit cutters or bigs out of the live dribble. He is not someone who pounds the ball like I said, and when Washington gets it, he looks to be aggressive within the flow of the offense. If we analyze Washington's complete offensive package, then I think we find someone tailor-made for today's NBA. He does not have any outstanding strengths except maybe his pull-up 2 right now, but Washington is incredibly steady. He is reliant on ball screens, but then he can get into a floater, pull-up, or pass. He can handle the ball in transition as well, and create plays for others like we're about to see. In general, Washington is just a good basketball player, who makes smart plays and has tools to offset his improvement areas. There are still things I need to see for sure, such as Washington not having played with a real NBA big at Kentucky. He's not had someone yet who is either a real lob threat to play above the rim, or someone who is comfortable stretching the floor to either shoot or provide more spacing. Because of that, Washington can still be a tricky evaluation in some ways, but all the signs, I think, are pointing up. On the defensive end of the floor, TyTy Washington is generally a neutral defender, as long as he's playing with effort. He can stay in front and blow up plays once in a while. When he wants to, Washington can really compete on defense. He's got some bite to him, picking up full court here and there to harass opposing guards. I'll get into this in a bit, but Washington might be better on the ball than off the ball right now. He probably only has the size to guard 1s and 2s, and even that is partly because of his length, but I don't think he will subtract anything defensively in like year 3 or 4 of his career. Washington is not going to be a stopper, but he plays with solid maturity. He puts in multiple efforts, flips his hips, and tries to remain disciplined. He contests, slides, cuts off angles, and you're not guaranteed to blow past him. Nothing he does will blow you away per se, but that's sort of like the rest of Washington's game. I think this possession against UNC captures Washington's encouraging defense pretty well. He does not make a home run play really at all, but he is sturdy and engaged throughout the possession, which is exactly what you want. Obviously, defense is about more than just effort, but I appreciate Washington's willingness to compete on this side of the ball. Right now, I feel okay with where Washington is for a college freshman. You'll see him pay some attention to detail with stuff like closeouts or rotation, which shows to me that he's thinking about the game on defense. Really, you know what he's going to give you, so it's not like you're going to be surprised one way or the other. That can be a bad thing in terms of that I absolutely think Washington has a somewhat low defensive ceiling. More on that in a bit, but it is also safe, and this might be what a team ends up valuing in the range I see Washington going in come draft night. In terms of improvement points on the ball, well, I think Washington still needs to raise his consistency. Like I've said in many of my videos, this is not a surprise for his age, and sure, Washington is a bit older for a freshman, but he's still at a similar developmental stage. Either way, Washington can sometimes play too upright, or he can lack urgency, so once in a while he will concede a drive or just not be in place to contest a pull-up. None of these things are alarming for now, but you definitely want to see improvement because those lapses are taken advantage of in the NBA. And even though I do like Washington more on the ball, like I said, I do think he's shown some interesting signs away from it. At times, Washington can track plays, and his 6'9" wingspan allows him to play big and get steals or deflections. Washington racks up about a steal and a half per game, and he does so while not gambling too much. You can see him process things because he genuinely does have flashes of anticipating and breaking up actions. Watch here against Georgia, as Washington guards the pick and roll, sees where the pass is going, and then quickly rotates to the screener to slap the ball down and break things up. In this clip, Washington comes over, gets the steal using his length, and then makes the outlet pass for an easy bucket. But despite those clips, there are reasons why I prefer Washington on the ball right now. Simply put, he's still prone to making too many lapses when he does not have to be an active defender. What I mean by that is that Washington does not tend to play all the time with urgency. That does not manifest into awful mistakes, but he can be late closing out or reacting to a rotation. Washington's awareness could really stand to improve, and one thing that worries me, for example, is that it can often be easy to just backcut him. Washington is definitely guilty of ball watching at times, and this will be an improvement area for him, especially when he has to guard movement-heavy offenses in the NBA. Overall, I think Washington will be limited but fine as an on-ball positional defender with his length, mobility, and efforts. But off the ball, he still has plenty of work to do on making those flashes a constant reality. At the top of the video, I asked the question, how high can TyTy Washington go in this year's draft? And I think the answer is pretty high. Now, to be clear and to get this right off the bat, off my chest, I should say, Jaden Ivey, in my opinion, is by far the best guard prospect in the 2022 draft. And Johnny Davis is probably right behind Ivey. I think Ivey might be a tier above Davis. Of course, I'll have a video on Ivey coming out relatively soon, so we'll get into all that discussion shortly. But with Davis and Washington, I think the difference is that right off the bat in the NBA, I could see Johnny Davis making a living based off his defense and then, kind of picking up points after he gets himself going on that end of the floor. Whereas with TyTy Washington, I think that his game, although his defense is not terrible, like I said in the video, his game is generally a lot more conducive to getting those on-ball reps, or at the very least, being allowed to play make and shoot more at will. Like I said in the video, I do think TyTy Washington can be a somewhat tricky evaluation. Not because of a sample size or anything like that, absolutely not. I mean, we've seen TyTy play a lot this season, and hopefully the injury that he picked up is not too serious. But where I do think that TyTy can be a little bit tricky is, like I said in the video, the bigs that he plays with. Now, based on what we've seen at Kentucky, I do think that Washington lends himself to more of a secondary guard role right now, but it's hard to tell. Because in the NBA, when he runs the pick and roll, he's not really going to be hitting, in most cases, Chibwe on the foul line for him to take a jumper. Or, if he kicks it out to Keon Brooks, then Keon Brooks is not going to be, someone in the NBA who takes a step in and settles for a mid-range shot rather than a three. So the personnel that he's had to work with, even though they are very skilled and they are talented and productive, I'm not sure how that will translate to the NBA. So I'm very eager to see TyTy once he gets up to scratch with NBA personnel, kind of see how that shifts, his demeanor on the floor, whether it will shift it at all. Whether he'll be encouraged to, maybe expand his passing a little bit, because that's one of my main knocks on TyTy Washington. He does a lot of things well, and I don't know if he does any one thing very, very well, but like he's just very solid all around, which is good, but at the same time, he's not going to blow you away with anything. TyTy Washington, he's not really the most creative player, and even though he is versatile in that I do think that, alright, maybe he can become a 3-level scorer down the line, right now, I mean, you're pretty much guaranteed that he's going to take spot-up threes, he's going to take 1 or 2 dribble pull-up jumpers, usually coming out of screens, and if not, then he's going to get into his floater. So you kind of know what to expect, and what you see is what you get. It just depends on how you feel about that. Finally, before I wrap this up, I do want to quickly touch on his defense. I think TyTy Washington is going to be a positional defender. So he's mostly going to be on 1s and 2s in the NBA, and the only reason I really think he can guard 2s is just because of that 6'9" wingspan, which should really come in handy and kind of lets him play bigger than he is. However, I do think that TyTy's potential on this end of the floor is pretty limited. He's going to play with good effort, and he's going to compete, like I mentioned in the video. We're going to see him rack up steals here or there. Like, I think he's okay, or he can be okay in the long run as an off-the-ball defender. But right now, I mean, in year 1 or year 2, I definitely expect him to be, I don't want to say non-existent on this end of the floor, because, I mean, who knows? But I definitely would not expect him to have a major impact defensively early on in the NBA. As always, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like. Make sure to leave a comment telling me what you think of TyTy Washington. And as always, if you enjoy the channel, if you want to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time.